They say it happened on an ordinary Monday morning, but there was nothing ordinary about what went down. The entire office would later whisper about it like folklore, how one of the wealthiest, most arrogant bosses at the firm humiliated a struggling employee in front of everyone, only to have the entire script of power flipped the next day in the most shocking, dramatic way imaginable. It was the kind of story that didn't make sense at first, how someone so invisible became the center of it all, and how a man so secure in his status found himself at the mercy of the one person he least respected. No one could explain the shift. All they knew was that it began with a sneer and ended with an empty chair in the corner office, still warm from its last occupant. The morning it started, the air in the downtown office tower was already thick with tension. The employees of Beckford and Slate Financial Services filed in like they always did, swiping badges, sipping lukewarm coffee, clinging to the last remnants of a weekend that had passed too fast. One woman stood out, Elise Monroe, a quiet, reserved single mother who wore her stress like a second skin. Her clothes were modest, her shoes worn, and her lunch usually a sandwich packed the night before to save money. She didn't talk much, and most people didn't talk to her. She worked hard, stayed late, and kept her head down. That's probably why no one saw it coming. Nathan Beckford, the owner of the firm and a man who wore wealth like armor, strode into the office like a king returning to his throne. Mid-50s, always in tailored suits that cost more than a month's rent, Nathan was the type who loved the sound of his own voice and made sure everyone else heard it too. That day, he was particularly cruel. Maybe his investments were down. Maybe his ego was bruised. But whatever it was, he was hunting for someone to tear into, and Elise was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. It started with a comment. She had asked a question in the weekly meeting about client portfolio options. Nothing out of line, just trying to clarify. But Nathan turned his gaze on her like she'd insulted him personally. He scoffed, leaned forward, and said loud enough for the whole floor to hear, "Maybe if you spent less time clipping coupons and more time understanding finance, you wouldn't sound so ignorant." The room went silent. Then the laughter started. Quiet at first, then bolder. Elise froze. Her cheeks burned. Her eyes flicked around the room, hoping someone would intervene, but no one did. Nathan leaned back with a smug grin, the kind that said, "Know your place." She didn't cry. She didn't storm out. She just nodded and sat down slowly, folding her hands to stop them from shaking. What most people didn't notice was the slight, deliberate smirk that formed at the corner of her mouth as she looked down. That was the first inconsistency. The second came the following morning. Nathan arrived at the office like always, sunglasses on, driver waiting, expensive cologne lingering behind him like a signature. But when he stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor, something was off. The receptionist didn't greet him. The security guard barely looked up. His assistant stammered when he asked for coffee, then disappeared. There was an eerie quiet in the air, like the entire building was holding its breath. He brushed it off until he saw the sign on the glass office door that used to have his name etched in gold. It was gone. In its place, E. Monroe, Interim Executive Director. His first reaction was confusion, then rage. He marched in, demanding answers. He shouted for Elise. He called for HR. He tried to log into his computer, only to find his access revoked. Phone dead. Email disabled. Panic began to rise in his chest. He turned to storm out, and stopped short when he saw Elise standing there in a sleek navy blazer and heels, calm as ice, holding a tablet in one hand and a security badge in the other. She walked past him like he didn't exist, and settled into the chair behind what used to be his desk. "Is this some kind of joke?" Nathan growled. But no one laughed. The rest of the office watched in stunned silence. Elise's posture was relaxed, her tone even. "You've been relieved of your duties, Mr. Beckford," she said without looking up. "As of this morning, the board has authorized an internal restructure. You'll receive the details in your exit packet. Nathan blinked. You? You don't have the authority? You're a nobody. No, Elise said, locking eyes with him now. I was a nobody. Until last night. And just like that, the truth began to unravel. What the office didn't know, what Nathan had never bothered to learn, was that Elise Monroe wasn't just a quiet employee with a rough background. She was the silent majority stakeholder, the original co-founder's daughter, a woman who had once walked away from the firm after her father died, choosing to raise a very young girl in her early 20s on her own rather than fight through corporate politics. But her shares, untouched, hidden behind trusts, shell names, and legal silences. She returned only when she was ready, and Nathan's public humiliation was the match that lit the powder keg she'd been sitting on for years. The inconsistencies kept piling up, like how she never contested her meager position or asked for promotions, how she sat in meetings and listened, watched, waited, how she took notes not just on clients, but on people. People like Nathan, who had bullied their way to the top and never once looked behind them. Elise had receipts, recordings, leverage, and now she had control. Nathan tried to threaten legal action, but the firm's legal department didn't answer his calls. He stormed into HR only to be escorted out by security, quietly, discreetly, but firmly. For the first time, he was on the outside looking in. And Elise? She was just getting started. Later that afternoon, whispers began circulating through the office. Elise had scheduled a company-wide audit, an investigation into misused funds and unethical practices, the kind of probe that could not only strip someone of power, but land them behind bars. Nathan had always walked the line. Now that line was under a microscope. And then came the most chilling detail of all. Elise didn't leave that night. She stayed late, long after the office had gone dark, reviewing files in the executive suite, sipping tea like she belonged there. Her daughter, a very young woman in her early 20s, arrived quietly and locked the door behind her. Together they opened a black briefcase and laid out documents that no one outside that room was supposed to see. Names, signatures, offshore accounts. And one photograph, grainy, dated, but unmistakable. Nathan Beckford, shaking hands with someone no one expected. The next morning, Nathan didn't show up. By noon, a reporter was parked outside the building. By 3 p.m., the police were seen reviewing surveillance tapes from the lobby, and by 5:17 p.m., Elise stepped out of the office, handed her security badge to the guard, and walked straight into a waiting car without a word. The employees watched from the windows, stunned. No one knew where she was going, or why she'd just handed over her access. No one knew what was in that briefcase. But one thing was clear. This was no longer about revenge. It was about something bigger, something deeper, something that started long before any of them had walked through those glass doors. And somewhere, in an undisclosed location, a man who used to run the entire company sat alone in a dimly lit room, his phone buzzing relentlessly with unknown numbers, headlines lighting up the screen with words like fraud, embezzlement, and federal probe. His face pale, his hands trembling. A knock echoed at the door. He didn't answer it, not yet. Because outside that door, everything was about to change again. On the night it all collapsed, Nathan Beckford didn't sleep. He paced the hardwood floors of his penthouse, still dressed in the wrinkled suit from the day before, eyes bloodshot, hands trembling from equal parts fury and fear. He hadn't spoken to anyone in hours. His lawyer wouldn't return his calls. The board of directors had disconnected him from internal channels. His driver had vanished. The woman at the front desk of his building hadn't greeted him with a smile that morning, just a tight-lipped nod, like she already knew. The empire he built was crumbling, and no one seemed surprised. He hadn't known Elise's full name was Elise Monroe Hastings. the daughter of Charles Hastings, one of the original founders who had been quietly forced out 2 decades ago when Nathan orchestrated a hostile restructure. Everyone thought Charles had retired for health reasons. That's what Nathan made sure the papers said. But Elise knew the truth. Her father had suffered a heart attack 2 days after signing away control of the firm under immense pressure. Nathan never visited him in the hospital, never even sent flowers. Elise remembered every second of that week. She was in her mid-20s then, a rising star at another firm in Chicago. And when her father died, she walked away from finance completely. Or so it seemed. But while Nathan climbed higher, Elise watched from a distance. She buried her name under trusts and corporate shells, kept her holdings secret, and waited. It took 20 years. But it came down to one day, one moment in the boardroom, when he mocked her in front of everyone. That was the switch, and the fuse had already been lit. By morning, news vans lined the street in front of Beckford and Slate. Headlines were exploding across financial blogs and local channels. CEO under scrutiny for fraud allegations. Corporate restructure sends shockwaves through industry. Whistleblower reveals secret stakeholder coup. Elise had not spoken publicly, but that only made the speculation worse. The mystery added fuel to the fire. Anonymous sources claimed Beckford had hidden millions offshore. Others hinted that the firm's impressive quarterly growth was built on falsified projections and shell investments through fake vendor accounts. But none of that would have stuck if it hadn't been for the file. The black briefcase Elise had opened with her daughter the night before contained more than just evidence. It held a document signed by Nathan himself 10 years prior, one he believed had been destroyed, authorizing a series of covert payments to fake contractors who never existed. A digital paper trail traced those payments to an account in the Cayman Islands under the name Rutherford Gale. That name matched a fake identity Nathan used while purchasing real estate in Antigua, property registered under a shell company that had never filed a single tax return. By midweek, the IRS had frozen his accounts. By Thursday, the SEC had opened an investigation. And by Friday, Nathan's penthouse had been searched. He wasn't arrested, not yet. But the walls were closing in fast, and he knew it. Meanwhile, Elise didn't show up at the office again. She didn't need to. Her name had already been etched onto every document that mattered. The board had voted unanimously to appoint her as interim CEO with full executive privileges. There was no resistance. Some of the same people who laughed during the meeting now couldn't look her in the eye. She never mentioned it. She didn't need to. Her daughter, Amara, a very young woman in her early 20s, took over as her personal assistant. But anyone who watched closely could see she was being groomed for more. Amara handled confidential emails, took meetings with the firm's top attorneys, and was often seen leaving the building with encrypted flash drives and sealed envelopes. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it looked eerily like her mother's smirk, the same one Elise gave when Nathan humiliated her right before everything began to flip. Nathan tried to retaliate through the press. A leaked interview surfaced where he claimed Elise had manipulated the board, that she'd falsified documents and framed him. But the moment he opened his mouth, Elise's legal team responded with a 147-page binder, digitally watermarked, time-stamped, and backed by testimony from 3 former accountants he'd fired years ago. The silence after that was deafening. Still, Nathan wasn't ready to go down without a fight. He disappeared from the public eye for 3 days. On the 4th, he returned to the office lobby in person, wearing a gray hoodie and dark sunglasses. No driver, no entourage, just him, holding a manila envelope and walking with the slow determination of someone with nothing left to lose. He asked for Elise. Security refused. He demanded the board's extension. They didn't pick up. Then, in front of a dozen employees and a few stunned reporters, he tossed the envelope onto the front desk and said, "She'll want to see this." It wasn't a threat. It was a confession. Inside the envelope was a letter handwritten by Nathan himself. In it, he admitted to orchestrating Charles Hastings' ousting, falsifying financial records, and forging board votes to maintain control of the company. He claimed he did it all in the name of growth, believing that the end justified the means. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't apologize. But he ended the letter with 5 words that made everyone stop breathing. She was always watching. I lost. When Elise read it, she didn't say a word. She walked into her father's old office, now hers, and placed the letter beside the one document her father had written just days before his death. A note that read, "The only legacy worth leaving is the truth." That night, Elise did something no one expected. She called a press conference. The media gathered in the main boardroom, the same one where she had once been ridiculed. Elise entered in a charcoal gray suit, no jewelry, no fanfare. Amara stood behind her. Her voice was calm, firm, unapologetic. "My name is Elise Monroe Hastings," she said. "And for 20 years, I have waited to tell this story, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted every piece of it to be undeniable." She laid out the truth. The boardroom betrayal, her father's downfall, Nathan's crimes. She didn't dramatize. She didn't beg for sympathy. She simply presented the evidence, meticulously and without emotion. By the end of the hour, the room was silent. Even the reporters looked stunned. And then she dropped the final blow. "I have instructed our legal team to transfer full ownership of Beckford and Slate into a non-profit trust, with executive power held by an independent ethics board. Profits will be redirected toward scholarships for underrepresented communities and support for financial literacy programs in underserved areas." Gasps rippled across the room. This company was built on greed. It will now operate on transparency. Someone asked if she planned to stay on as CEO. She smiled. "Number, I've already accepted a new position, one that's been a long time coming." The next day, Elise walked into the federal courthouse downtown, flanked by her legal team, and was sworn in as the special advisor to the Department of Corporate Oversight, tasked with investigating executive fraud in major financial institutions. The day after that, Nathan Beckford was officially indicted on multiple counts of wire fraud, embezzlement, and obstruction of justice. He was denied bail. When the footage of him in handcuffs aired on the news that evening, he didn't shout or resist. He just looked straight ahead, hollow-eyed, and said nothing. Weeks passed. Then one morning, Amara arrived at the now non-profit-run firm and found a small package sitting on Elise's old desk. No return address, just a single sheet of paper inside with a hand-scrawled note. "Funny how everything changes, isn't it? You may have won the building, but you didn't burn the blueprint. RG." Attached was a thumb drive, encrypted, and labeled with one word: retribution. Amara stared at it for a long time, lips pressed into a line, then slipped it into her coat pocket and walked toward her mother's old office. Outside, dark clouds were rolling in, and the sky seemed to hum with tension. Because while Nathan Beckford was behind bars, the game wasn't over. Someone else had just stepped onto the board, and the next move was already in play.